All right, so last week we wrapped up our series on discipleship, and I just felt kind of led to do something a little bit different for our next series. So what we've been going through recently are basically different ideologies, different things that kind of occur in your life with a biblical backing on how to handle those things, how to go through those things, how to navigate those things. But I wanted to kind of go back and kick it old school for a few weeks and go through just a book of the Bible, verse by verse with you guys. So we're going to be digging into the book of Hebrews. This first lesson is going to be a lot of just kind of info. All right, it's going to be a lot of info. A lot of people, whenever they read like chapter 1 in a book, it's generally like the introduction chapter. It's kind of what you see. And a lot of times we just kind of skip over the intro because we want to get into the meat of the message. But in the case of Hebrews, chapter 1 isn't really labeled an introduction, but it is one. But what it does is lay the entire groundwork for the rest of the book. So in order for us to have a proper understanding of the book of Hebrews, we need to have a proper understanding of Hebrews chapter 1. And essentially what we want to talk about throughout the chapter of Hebrews, what we're going to find to be a theme in this book, is that Jesus Christ is supreme over everything. All right, over anything that you can possibly encounter, anything that you can come into contact with, Jesus is supreme. So Hebrews, in a nutshell, is the supremacy of Christ. And that is actually what the header for chapter 1 is. It is Hebrews chapter 1, the supremacy of God's Son. All right, the supremacy of God's Son. So, context is important. We'll get into that in a second. But there are some contextual facts that we need to understand about this book beforehand, before we even get into it. All right, a reason that this letter was written was to actually prepare Jewish Christians for the coming destruction of Jerusalem. All right. After accepting Christ as the Messiah, the Jewish Christians were still zealous for the temple rites, right? The sacrifices that they would offer in the temple. They still desired those things and wanted those things and semi-worshipped those things, thinking that their beloved city was about to become the capital of the world under their Messiah's reign. And instead, literally the polar opposite happened. All right, the Roman army came. They wiped out the holy city, and the temple rites ceased. So the letter, in and of itself, was written to explain to the Jewish Christians that the animals that they sacrificed, that they loved, and had become so attached to, were now completely useless. That the blood of a lamb or a bull can never fully take away sin forever. And in fact, those sacrifices that they had fallen in love with offering were never meant to be forever anyway. They were just a picture of the coming sacrifice of Christ. And now Christ had come for those sacrifices, and those sacrifices, they had served their purpose already. So in a nutshell, what we're saying in that is this: God's people must only look to Christ for redemption and salvation. All right, the people of God should only look to Jesus Christ for redemption and salvation. Through this book and all of Scripture, we see the story of a loving God coming for his disobedient people. Here in Hebrews, we specifically see him taking away some of the things that were a distraction, right? Things keeping his people from seeing him, loving him, and experiencing him clearly. We need to learn to let those actions, the things that people have experienced in the past, show us the lengths that our God is willing to go for us to be with him, for us to see him, for us to love him. We must strip everything away that isn't Jesus, and we must stop worshiping the gifts over the giver. You've heard me say that phrase a lot if you've been a part of this ministry for a decent amount of time. But something that we do with God is we'll take the gifts that he has given us and we begin to worship those things over him. We take value in the things that he's given us over the one who gave them to us. It's kind of like if Santa Claus showed up to your house and he dropped presents around your tree, and then you take the presents and you see Santa and you're just like, forget this guy. This thing's awesome. Like, what he gave me is awesome. Forget the dude that gave it to me. I don't care about him. I just care about what he gave me. And that's how we treat God a lot of the times. Is we say, wow, I love this thing that you gave me, but I don't care about you a bit. What you do doesn't really matter to me. I just like the things that you give me. We just like the gifts. We don't really care about the giver. Romans and Hebrews get mentioned together sometimes for whatever reason. Whatever. They're mentioned in the same context a lot. But the book of Romans, which is something we need to go through sometime as well, was addressed to the capital of the Gentile world. And our text, Hebrews, was to the capital of the Jewish nation. God literally, this is a cool thing. We're going to pump the brakes on this for a second. God literally founded the Jewish nation and cared for it over centuries for the purpose of bringing through one nation blessings to all nations. All right, there's so many people that when they get into God's word, they're like, well, why did God choose the Jewish people as his chosen people? Well, it wasn't a selfish thing that God did. It was that God chose this small group of people for him to be glorified in, so that he could then glorify himself through all nations, right? And what we see from that is this. He founded the Jewish nation, cared for it over centuries, wanted to bring through one nation blessing to all nations by this. A great king would come out of this one nation to rule over all of the nations, right? God had a plan all along that his son would come from this nation and he would then rule over all of the nations. But the thing is, now that we've made it to the book of Hebrews, that king has now come, right? Jesus has come. Jesus has died for us. Jesus has resurrected. That is where we're at. We are now in a post-Christ world, and that he is no longer physically walking around the planet with the disciples. He has ascended back up into heaven, and he has commissioned them out. So these things have already taken place. The book of Romans is dealing with the relationship of the king to his universal kingdom. What I mean by that is whenever we read the book of Romans, the correct context of it is that it is written to the universal church, right, to universal believers. So we can say the book of Romans applies universally to followers of Christ. But when we read the book of Hebrews in the correct context, it is a relationship of the king to the one nation from which he came. All right, so the proper lens of Hebrews is that he is writing to the Jewish nation, the nation in which he came. And I know this is kind of complicated, but what we apply that then to are followers and believers in Christ. So we can then take that and we can say, the book of Hebrews applies to me. Because of what Christ did for me, I'm a part of that brotherhood. I'm a part of that sisterhood. I identify with that because he is my king. So, I know this is a lot. We're almost to the actual lesson. I think it's very significant that this is the first chapter of this entire book. All right, and speaking to Jewish Christians and placing this as the first text for them to read, he's reiterating the extreme importance of the supremacy of Jesus Christ. He is laying a foundation for them to show them that there is nothing for them to go back to, and that the old way that they're tempted with and most comfortable with offers them nothing. That Jesus is all they need. So if you can bring up Hebrews chapter 1 on the screens. Long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom also he created the world. He's the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature, and he upholds the universe by the word of his power. After making purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high, having become as much superior to angels as the name he has inherited is more excellent than theirs. For to which of the angels did God ever say, "You're my son, today I have begotten you"? Or again, "I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son"? And again, when he brings the firstborn into the world, he says, "Let all God's angels worship him." Of the angel, he says, he makes his angels winds and his ministers a flame of fire. But of the Son, he says, "Your throne, O God, is forever and ever. The scepter of uprightness is the scepter of your kingdom. He have loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness beyond your companions. And you, Lord, laid the foundation of the earth in the beginning, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you remain. They will all wear out like a garment. Like a robe, you will roll them up. Like a garment, they will be changed. But you are the same, and your years will have no end." And to which of the angels has he ever said, "Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet"? Are they not all ministering spirits sent out to serve for the sake of those who are to inherit salvation? All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to work through this text verse by verse, chunk by chunk. So whenever I say the verse, just put that verse back up on the screen so we can kind of have a visual example for it. Obviously, we're going to start out in verses 1 through 2. All right, verses 1 through 2. "Long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in the last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom also he created the world." What we need to take away from this initial little tidbit is that this is a superior way to be communicated to. All right, it shows us that they were communicated from fathers and prophets to hearing directly from the Son. All right, this is a vastly superior way to be communicated to. We're hearing directly from the Son as opposed to from fathers and prophets. It's like going from communicating through a middleman to hearing from the man himself. The way that we can sort of take that into, American or modern context is through real estate. Like, imagine you're in the market to buy a house, right? Your realtor acts as the middleman between you and the seller. He communicates to you the things that the buyer is saying so that you'll be in the loop and know what to expect. All right, realtors can be great, but imagine how much better it would be if you personally knew the owner of the home and they could tell you everything that you need to know about that house with 100% honesty. Communication, understanding, and the relationship to the homeowner would all be better through direct access, right? And in the same way, God has given us a superior method of communication. He cut out the middleman and allowed us to hear directly from heaven, directly from His Son who made a way for us. So hopefully that makes sense. God is essentially, He's removed the space between us and allowed us to communicate directly with Him. We don't have to go through someone to talk to God. We get to go through Jesus to talk to God. We don't have to go through a prophet or a man or a rabbi or a priest. We get to communicate directly to our Father. It's a superior way to communicate. So, verses 3 and 4. He's the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of His nature, and He upholds the universe by the word of His power. After making purification for sins, He sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high, having become as much superior to angels as the name He has inherited is more excellent than theirs. Things that He is. He's radiance of glory, the exact imprint of God's nature, upholds the universe by the word of His power. He made purification for sins. He sits at the right hand of God, and He is superior to the angels in every single way. Like, think about, for these people that would be hearing this for the first time or learning about this from the first time, this is an incredible opener to a story, right? You're being introduced to this Jesus, right? This Son of God. And He's been given all of these characteristics. Like, imagine if you've never heard of Jesus before in your entire life. You live in this New Testament time period where there's no technology, no lights, no cars, no anything. And you're hearing a storyteller sit across you from the first time and say, everything I'm about to tell you is 100% true. This Jesus that I'm telling you about, He's the radiance of God's glory. He's the exact imprint of God's nature. He upholds the very universe that you in this time period actually know literally nothing about, because you have no idea what's even out there. All right, but He upholds that infinite universe by what? He upholds it by the word of His power. So literally the mention of His power upholds the entire universe. He made purification for your sins. He sits at the right hand of God and is superior to angelic beings in every single way. Jesus is creator, preserver, and the heir of the universe. Right? This is incredible. Like, if you're hearing this, it's blowing you away. And the most beautiful thing about this act of God is that it was an eternal act of God. This wasn't a temporary thing. It's not something that wears off. He is every single one of these titles and things forever. And the coolest thing about this is these people know a lot about the rule and reign of a king, because that is what they are used to. And logically for them, they know that the reign of a king comes to an end. All right, so they're probably sitting there wondering, well, when does it stop? When does it end? He sounds cool. He sounds awesome. He sounds powerful. But surely His time's going to run out. And that's when they get to come in and say, no, this is forever. His reign never ends. He is supreme forever. We need to make sure that we're going to be viewing verses 4 through 14 through the correct lens. All right. What's being communicated is that Christ is the fulfillment of the Mosaic system, is in the fulfillment of the law. He is not its administrator. All right, he did what we could not do. He came and he fulfilled the law. He did not cancel out the 10 commandments, but he fulfilled them. He did them perfectly because we could never live up to that expectation. So God sent his son to fulfill that expectation so that we could then pursue him in grace and come to know his love and not have to live under the condemnation of not being good enough. Because the fact of the matter is, with God, in comparison to him, we're never going to be good enough. But Jesus was good enough on our behalf. That's the beautiful thing about following him, is that when God looks at you and you don't know Christ, he sees sin, he sees condemnation, he sees something that cannot be with him. But when you accept Christ and he becomes Lord of your life, what he then sees is his perfect Son. And that's why you hear when you enter into heaven, "Well done, good and faithful servant." It's not because of anything you did, it's because of everything that Christ did on your behalf. And that is a beautiful, beautiful thing. He did what we never could. All right. Christ is superior in every way to the angels. All right. Every way to Moses, which is man, and to the Levitical priesthood that administered that Mosaic law. Because of this and his sinless life leading to his death and resurrection from the cross, he is our perfect atoning sacrifice, living, breathing perfection in every single way. He is superior. Verse 5. "For to which of the angels did God ever say, 'You're my son, today I've begotten you'? Or again, 'I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son'?" Important thing to take away from this: God never called any of his angels son. All right, it's very straightforward, but God never called any of his angels son. Verse 6. "And again, when he brings the firstborn into the world, he says, 'Let all God's angels worship him.'" So these angelic beings we find in verse 6, not only did he never call them son, but they will worship his son. All right, in the same way that we worship God, the angels will worship God, except where they are with him in heaven, they're literally worshiping him 24 hours a day, 7 days of eternity, right? Like they're always worshiping God. Verse 7. "Of the angels," he says, "he makes his angels winds and his ministers a flame of fire." For a lot of people, that's an easy verse to kind of overlook because you read it at first and you're like, what the heck does that even mean? But it's really deep and really important. All right, when we take angels as wind and ministers as fire, context is kind of the theme of this story, is key to this. All right, this is being communicated to a people who will worship literally anything that has power. All right. So angels were worshipped. People in power were worshipped. But the Son is superior to both of these in every way. Think about this, right? Fire and wind in and of themselves are a powerful thing, right? Think about the power of a spark. Like if you have a spark that comes off of a fire or a match or a lighter, and that spark falls into the right environment, it can cause absolute chaos. It can cause a crazy flame, right? Think about the power of a tiny flame in a pitch black dark space, right? In pure darkness, when you can't see your hand in front of your face, you can see a tiny, tiny light from ridiculously far away because light dispels darkness, right? There's a lot of power in that flame. Think about the extreme power in a forest fire, that little spark that we talked about. Whenever it starts to catch onto the woods and onto the grass and onto the fallen timber, it can literally take out entire communities in a matter of days, right? Flames are powerful. One of the biggest examples to me of the power of fire is illustrated through a crock pot in This Is Us. I don't know if any of you have seen This Is Us, one of my favorite shows. If you haven't, this is like major spoiler. So, for those of you guys that haven't seen it, the dad passes away, all right? He dies. And the way that you come to find out that he dies is, he's like the best dad ever, first of all, if you watch the show. Like, this dude is like 5-star father. But they had this crock pot that their neighbor gave them that is plugged into the wall. And a tiny spark comes out of the power outlet and ends up catching their curtain on fire and burns their entire house down. And the crazy thing is he escapes from the house, but then his daughter's freaking out because their dog is still in the house. So he says, this dude like loves his kids. And he knows how much joy this dog brings his daughter. So he goes back into a house that is engulfed in flames and gets the dog and brings it back outside. And it's crazy because you're like, whoa, he lived, what? Like, I thought he was going to die. And then he goes into the hospital and goes into cardiac arrest from smoke inhalation and he dies. All right, so when you get to the end of season 1, that's your big like, Jack, no! Like, I'm sitting there like, oh, Jack, I guess you're so good. You're such a good dad, Jack. Oh, my gosh. But that's the power of fire, right? It can engulf an entire building, but there's additional power that comes from that fire, and smoke comes from fire as well. So there's powers that come from that power. Think about wind, right? Think about tornadoes. Think about hurricanes. Think about when you see a gigantic wind turbine that is literally sucking wind in, and windmills that are creating power for buildings and entire communities from the power of oxygen being pushed in a particular direction. Wind is a powerful thing. And what this is trying to point out to us is this. Angels and man can be a powerful force. They're a powerful thing on their own. But their power does not compare to that of the king. The power of angels and man does not compare to the power of the one who created angels and man, to the one who created wind and fire. All right, Matthew 10:28, if you can pull that up really quick. This is from last week, actually. It says, do not fear those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather, fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Matthew 10:28 showcases that we shouldn't fear those that can kill the body, things that can harm us, but that we should fear the one who can destroy the soul in hell. And my question for you before we even move forward in that is, do we really understand that power? Like, think about the amount of anybody. This is super morbid, but anybody can kill somebody. Don't take that like a weird, like, demented way or anything like that. But any person can kill another person. You can take a gun and shoot somebody and they're dead. What he's saying is that's not power. All right, that's not power. Real power is someone that controls your destination. He controls your eternity. Think about that. This is a God who at the end of the day has the power to send us and condemn us to hell forever, or allow us into fellowship with him forever. Right? And all that rests on the fact that he extends us an offer to say yes to him. And if we say yes to him and follow him, then we're with him forever. And if we do not, the reality of that situation is eternal separation from him, which is far worse than a really hot fire or anything like that. I've used this phrase for a lot of you before, but some of you haven't heard it. Salvation, we talked about it even last week. If you get the literal hell scared out of yourself, then that's not getting saved. All right, fear of a destination does not save you. So you hear a lot of these pastors and preachers, they're like, hell's super hot. You don't want to go there. You'll burn forever. And it's like, dude, why are we trying to scare people into following Jesus? We should be preaching Christ's love to people. Of course, tell them there's a place that if you don't know God, you're going to be there forever. But that shouldn't be your motivation to follow him. Your motivation to follow him should be because he's good, he loves you, and he came for you. Not because there's this terrifying destination, this terrifying place that you don't want to be. And honestly, hell is a lot worse than burning. All right, because the fact of the matter is your entire existence, even if you don't know Christ, he's been watching you. There's still been an element of the presence of God in your life. Hell is eternal separation from that. It's like crying out to your dad and him never answering to you, never coming for you, never doing anything for you, but instead turning his back on you and ignoring you forever. All right, never being with him. So, what we should fear is the one that can destroy that soul in hell. That is a lot of power. And not only is it a lot of power, but that is an eternal thing. That's an eternal thing. It's not like, oh, we didn't accept Christ and we go there and then we chill out and get burnt for a little bit. And we're like, okay, God, I get it. I believe that you're real. Please get me out. No, he's not listening. Right? Because he has nothing to do with sin. So this is an eternal decision that you've made to be separated from him. Verses 8 through 9. There we go. But of the Son he says, your throne, O God, is forever and ever. The scepter of uprightness is the scepter of your kingdom. Promise we're almost done. You've loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness beyond your companions. All right, the throne of the Son, in the same way that the destination we just talked about is forever, his throne is forever. His scepter of uprightness is the scepter of his kingdom. All right, he has loved righteousness and hated wickedness, and he is anointed beyond his companions. What that is teaching us is he is truly above it all in every single way. Every single way. Verses 10 through 12. You, Lord, laid the foundation of the earth in the beginning, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you will remain. They will all wear out like a garment. Like a robe, you will roll them up. Like a garment, they will be changed. But you are the same, and your years will have no end. All right? This part people can overlook because they're talking about robes and garments. What the heck? But you laid the foundation of the earth, right? From the very beginning, he laid the foundation of the earth. The heavens are the work of his hands. And he is telling us, these things will perish, but you remain. When he's saying they will perish, it means that they will wear out like a garment. He will remain, and he will roll them up like a robe. And the significance of that is, what they would do with old garments is they would roll them up and put them away to bring in the new. So what he's saying is these things will be changed out like an old garment for a new one. But he is the same. And his years will have no end. Verse 13. And to which of the angels has he ever said, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool under your feet? He's never ever told the angel, sit at my right hand. Psalm 110:1, if you can bring that up real quick. Almost done, guys, 3 more minutes. The Lord says to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. So, that seat is the most distinguished seat, right at the right hand of God, and it's only for Christ. Until I make the enemy a footstool for your feet. There's a big significance in that term, footstool, right? If we can cross-reference to that, Psalm 110:1. It is, so sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. The Eastern princes in this time used to tread on the necks of their vanquished enemies, and in token of their utter subjection. Right? Joshua 10:24, if you can pull that up. And when they brought those kings out to Joshua, Joshua summoned all the men of Israel and said to the chiefs of the men of war who had gone with him, come here, put your feet on the necks of these kings. Then they came near and put their feet on their necks. And it even says that some of the more haughty ones, in mounting their horses, used their enemies as a footstool. So they would literally take their enemy, put them down next to the horse, and then use their neck to mount their horse with. All right, it's extreme embarrassment, extreme shame. This passage, therefore, is a prediction of the entire conquest of evil angels and wicked men, which are Christ's enemies. He's going to come through, and when that day comes, he is going to take those enemies and they will be a footstool for him. He's just literally going to walk all over them. They do not stand a chance. Verse 14, last thing. Yeah, there we go. Are they not all ministering spirits sent out to serve for the sake of those who are to inherit salvation? They are ministering spirits sent out to serve for the sake of those who will inherit salvation. Talking about these angels, these different things, right? This is what we're getting into the context of. But Christ is still superior to all those because he has sent them. So, the foundation of the entire book of Hebrews, what we've gone through, which I'm totally aware of, was a lot. And you're probably just like, why'd you open a fire hose on my face? But while we needed to go through every bit of this for our ongoing series, is that we have to come to the full realization and understanding that Jesus Christ truly is supreme and far greater than absolutely anything that has ever been made, anything that has ever existed, anything that will ever be. He is greater, he is better, he is stronger, he is higher, his love is bigger. Everything about him is literally superior to everything that we have, everything that we could ever experience. So, essentially, our foundation for the rest of this study is that Jesus Christ is truly supreme. All right, he is supreme over absolutely everything.